A Kingdom's New Era. London, 1918. Rose Kensington had set fire to every letter Captain Thomas Sinclair had ever sent her, mourning his death in the only way she knew how. But as the embers cooled, she saw his name, traced in the soot, and beneath it, fresh words forming before her eyes. Find me. Chapter 1. The ashes whisper secrets. The scent of burnt paper still clung to the air, a bitter perfume that mirrored the ache in Rose Kensington's chest. The grate was cold, the fire long dead, yet the remnants of her past smoldered within her. She had done it. She had burned every letter, every carefully folded page of Captain Thomas Sinclair's elegant handwriting, reducing their 2 years of whispered promises and ardent declarations to a pile of gray ash. It was a symbolic act, a desperate attempt to cauterize a wound that refused to heal. The official telegram had arrived 3 weeks ago, stark and unforgiving, killed in action. Rose knelt before the fireplace, her fingers tracing the intricate floral pattern of the tiles, cold and unyielding beneath her touch. The room was dim, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the weak November sunlight, mirroring the perpetual twilight that had settled over her soul. Outside, the muffled sounds of London, the rumble of motor cars, the distant cries of street vendors seemed to belong to another world, a world she no longer inhabited. Her world had shrunk to this room, to this fireplace, to the ashes of a love that had bloomed, bright and fierce, only to be extinguished by the brutal winds of war. She had met Thomas at a charity ball, a whirlwind of silk gowns and patriotic fervor, just before he was deployed to the Western Front. He had been dashing in his uniform, his eyes the color of a stormy sea, full of a life that seemed to defy the looming shadow of war. Their courtship had been a stolen interlude, a fragile bubble of joy amidst the ever-present anxiety. His letters, arriving sporadically, censored and often delayed, had been her lifeline, each one a testament to a love that dared to blossom in the face of death. Now those letters were gone. She had watched them burn, the flames consuming the words that had once sustained her, feeling a perverse satisfaction in the destruction. It was a final act of mourning, a way to force herself to accept the unacceptable. But as the last ember faded, something caught her eye. A patch of soot on the back wall of the fireplace, darker than the rest, seemed to shift, to coalesce. Rose leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. The soot was forming letters, tracing a familiar name. Thomas Sinclair. Her heart, which she thought had been reduced to ashes along with his letters, gave a painful, defiant thud. She blinked, convinced it was a trick of the light, a cruel hallucination born of grief. But the name remained, stark and undeniable against the blackened brick. And then, beneath his name, more words began to form, slowly, agonizingly, as if written by an invisible hand. Find me. Rose recoiled, a gasp escaping her lips. She scrambled back, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. This was impossible. He was dead. The telegram had said so. She had seen the official seal, the cold, impersonal words. Yet, there it was, his name, and a plea that echoed the deepest, most secret yearning of her heart. She stared at the words, her mind racing. Was it a message from beyond the grave? A cruel joke played by a grieving mind? Or something else, something more? The rational part of her brain screamed that it was madness, a delusion born of sorrow and desperation. But another part, the part that had clung to the memory of his touch, the sound of his voice, the warmth of his smile, dared to hope. The room felt suddenly colder, the silence broken only by the frantic beating of her heart. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the sooty words. They felt real, solid, not like the ephemeral remnants of a dream. A shiver ran down her spine, a mixture of fear and a strange, nascent excitement. She thought of Thomas, of his unwavering spirit, his quiet strength, his refusal to succumb to despair even in the face of unimaginable horrors. Could he have survived? Could he have somehow found a way to send her this message, this desperate plea from the brink of oblivion? The thought, however illogical, ignited a spark of hope within her, a flicker of defiance against the crushing weight of grief. She looked around the room, at the familiar objects that had suddenly become alien, imbued with a new, unsettling significance. The portrait of her late father, a stern-faced general who had served in the Boer War, seemed to stare down at her with a mixture of disapproval and understanding. Rose stood up, her legs shaky but determined. She walked to the window and pulled back the curtains, letting the pale sunlight flood the room. The world outside was still there, still moving, still fighting. And somewhere out there, perhaps Thomas was alive. She didn't know how, she didn't know where, but she knew, with a certainty that defied logic and reason, that she had to find him. The ashes had whispered a secret, a promise of hope, and she would follow that whisper, even if it led her into the heart of darkness. The telegram may have declared him dead, but the name in the ashes, the impossible message, had given her a new purpose, a new reason to fight. Her own private war had just begun. Chapter 2. A Ghost in the Telegram Office. The Central Telegraph Office on St. Martin's-le-Grand was a cacophony of clattering machines, hurried footsteps, and hushed conversations. The air hung thick with the scent of ink and ozone, a smell that Rose had always associated with urgency and, inevitably, bad news. It was here, amidst this organized chaos, that the telegram announcing Thomas's death had been processed, a single sheet of paper that had shattered her world. She had come seeking a ghost, a trace of the man who had supposedly perished on the battlefields of France. The logical part of her mind, the part that still clung to the remnants of reason, told her it was a fool's errand. Yet, the impossible message in the ashes, the desperate plea "find me," propelled her forward, fueled by a hope that bordered on madness. Rose approached the counter, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. A young woman with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers looked up at her, her expression weary but polite. "Can I help you, madam?" "Yes," Rose said, her voice trembling slightly. I received a telegram a few weeks ago, regarding Captain Thomas Sinclair." The woman's eyes flickered with a flicker of recognition, or perhaps it was just pity. "Sinclair, yes, I believe I remember that one. Killed in action, wasn't he?" Rose swallowed hard. "Yes. That's what it said. But I need to see the original. The one that came from France." The woman frowned. "The original? Madam, those are filed away. It would take hours to find it, and even then please," Rose interrupted, her voice cracking. It's very important. I think there might have been a mistake." The woman studied her for a moment, her gaze softening with a hint of compassion. She had seen this before, the desperate denial of grieving relatives, clinging to any shred of hope, however improbable. But there was something in Rose's eyes, a fierce determination that went beyond mere grief. "All right," the woman sighed. "I'll see what I can do. But I can't promise anything." She disappeared into the back room, leaving Rose alone with her anxieties and the relentless clatter of the telegraph machines. Each tap, each whir, seemed to mock her hope, to remind her of the vast, impersonal machinery of war that had swallowed Thomas whole. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Rose paced restlessly, her gaze fixed on the door through which the clerk had vanished. She imagined Thomas, lost and alone, perhaps wounded, perhaps a prisoner, desperately trying to reach her. The image fueled her resolve, strengthening her belief that the message in the ashes was not a delusion, but a genuine cry for help. Finally, the woman returned, her face pale, her hands clutching a single sheet of paper. "I found it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But there's something strange about it." Rose's heart leaped. "Strange? What do you mean?" The woman hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The signature. It's not the usual one." Rose took the telegram, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold it. It was the original, the one that had been sent from the front lines. The message was the same, stark and brutal. "Captain Thomas Sinclair, killed in action, November 2nd, 1918. But the signature, it wasn't the neat, precise script of the usual military telegraph operator. It was different. Messier, almost frantic. And beneath the signature, barely visible, was a faint smudge, as if someone had tried to erase something. Rose held the telegram up to the light, her eyes straining to decipher the smudge. It looked like initials. T.S. And then beneath that, another, fainter initial. An R. Her breath caught in her throat. T.S. Thomas Sinclair. Our Rose? It was a message, hidden within the official notification of his death. A secret code, known only to them. A code they had used in their letters, a way to bypass the censors, to share their most intimate thoughts and fears. The woman was watching her, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Madam? Are you all right? Rose looked up, her face flushed, her eyes shining with a newfound determination. Yes, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. I'm more than all right. I'm going to find him. She turned and walked out of the telegraph office, leaving the clattering machines and the bewildered clerk behind. The telegram, clutched tightly in her hand, was no longer a death sentence, but a lifeline. A clue. The first step on a journey that would lead her into the heart of the war, into the shadows of espionage and betrayal, in search of a ghost who was very much alive. The ghost had, in a manner of speaking, returned the message. Chapter 3. The Cryptic Clues of Whitehall. Whitehall, the heart of British power, was a labyrinth of imposing buildings, hushed corridors, and men in dark suits carrying secrets like precious cargo. Rose, dressed in a modest but elegant gray dress and a hat that concealed most of her face, felt like an intruder in this world of power and intrigue. She had come seeking answers, guided by the cryptic initials on the telegram and a growing sense of unease about the official story of Thomas's death. The telegram's hidden message TSR had led her to a specific department within the War Office, a shadowy section known only as Special Intelligence. It was a place whispered about in hushed tones, a place where spies were recruited, secrets were traded, and lives were manipulated like pawns on a chessboard. She had managed to secure a meeting with a Mr. Alastair Finch, a mid-level official in the department, through a distant relative who had connections in the government. The relative, a retired colonel, had warned her to be careful, to trust no one, and to expect nothing but obfuscation and lies. The waiting room was small and sparsely furnished, with a single window overlooking a gray courtyard. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old paper, a scent that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Rose sat on a hard wooden chair, clutching her handbag, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. After what seemed like an eternity, a door opened, and a man emerged. He was tall and thin, with a sharp, angular face and eyes that seemed to pierce through her like needles. This was Mr. Finch. Mrs. Kensington? He asked, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. Yes, Rose replied, standing up. Please come in. His office was equally austere, dominated by a large mahogany desk cluttered with files and papers. A single lamp cast a harsh yellow light, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Mr. Finch gestured towards a chair in front of the desk. Please sit down. Rose sat, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. So Mr. Finch began, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. You have some questions regarding Captain Sinclair. Yes, Rose said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. I believe the information I received about his death is incomplete. Mr. Finch raised an eyebrow. Incomplete? In what way? Rose took a deep breath. I believe he may still be alive. Mr. Finch let out a short, humorless laugh. Madam, I assure you, Captain Sinclair is dead. We received confirmation from multiple sources. But the telegram, Rose began, pulling the crumpled piece of paper from her handbag. The signature, the initials. Mr. Finch took the telegram, his eyes scanning it briefly. He handed it back to her, his expression unchanged. A clerical error, I'm sure. These things happen in wartime. But the initials. Rose persisted. TSR. That was a code we used, a secret message. Mr. Finch's eyes narrowed. A code? What sort of code? Rose hesitated. She was revealing too much, trusting a man she didn't know, a man who represented the very system that had declared Thomas dead. But she had no choice. She had to follow this thread, however slender, however dangerous. A personal code, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For bypassing the censors. In our letters. Mr. Finch leaned forward, his gaze intense. And what did this code signify? Rose swallowed hard. It had meant Thomas Sinclair. Remember? She felt exposed, stating the full context of the message out loud. Mr. Finch was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on her face. Then he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Mrs. Kensington, you are playing a very dangerous game. Captain Sinclair was involved in highly sensitive work. Matters of national security. I strongly advise you to drop this matter. For your own safety. His words sent a chill down her spine. She had stumbled upon something bigger, something darker than she had imagined. Thomas wasn't just a soldier, he was a player in a secret war, a war fought in the shadows, a war where the truth was a casualty. But if he's alive, Rose stammered. He's not, Mr. Finch interrupted, his voice sharp. And even if he were, it would be in your best interest to believe he is dead. Some secrets are best left buried, Mrs. Kensington. For everyone's sake. He stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Rose rose to her feet, her legs trembling. She felt a wave of despair wash over her. She had come seeking answers, but she had only found more questions, more doubts, more danger. As she walked out of the office, Mr. Finch's words echoed in her ears. Some secrets are best left buried. But she knew she couldn't bury this secret. She couldn't bury Thomas. She had to find him, no matter the cost. The cryptic clues of Whitehall had only deepened the mystery, confirming her suspicion that his death was a carefully constructed lie. And she was determined to unravel that lie, even if it meant confronting the full force of the British intelligence apparatus. Chapter 4. Echoes of a Forbidden Waltz. The scent of beeswax and old wood filled the air as Rose stepped into the antique shop on Charing Cross Road. It was a haven of forgotten treasures, a place where the past whispered from every dusty corner. She had come seeking a connection to Thomas, a tangible link to the life they had shared before the war had torn them apart. The shop owner, a wizened old woman with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of stories, greeted her with a knowing smile. Looking for something special, dear? Rose hesitated. Perhaps. I'm looking for anything related to Captain Thomas Sinclair. He was a collector of sorts. The woman's smile widened. Ah, Captain Sinclair. A fine gentleman. He used to frequent my shop. Always had an eye for the unusual. Rose's heart skipped a beat. You knew him? Indeed. He was particularly fond of music boxes. Said they reminded him of a special dance. A special dance. Rose remembered it vividly. A waltz at a charity ball, the night they met. The orchestra had played a haunting melody, a tune that had become their song. He had held her close, whispering promises in her ear, oblivious to the swirling dancers around them. It had been a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a moment that had seemed to defy the looming shadow of war. Do you have any music boxes that he might have been interested in? Rose asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. The woman led her to a back room, where shelves were lined with intricately carved boxes of all shapes and sizes. He was particularly drawn to this one, she said, pointing to a small, unassuming box made of dark wood. Rose picked it up, her fingers tracing the smooth, polished surface. It was plain, almost unremarkable, but there was something about it, something that resonated with her. She opened the lid, and a delicate melody filled the air. It was their song, the waltz. Tears welled up in Rose's eyes. It was a sign, a message from Thomas, a reminder of the love they had shared, the love that still burned bright despite the distance and the danger. He bought this? Rose asked, her voice choked with emotion. The woman shook her head. No. He admired it, but he said he couldn't buy it. Said it was too painful. Reminded him of someone he might never see again. Rose closed the lid, the music abruptly stopping. Too painful, the words echoed the ache in her own heart. He had known, even then, that their time together was limited, that the war might separate them forever. But The woman continued, "He did leave something. Said he wanted to leave a trace." In case she reached under the counter and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was a diary, its pages filled with Thomas's elegant handwriting. Rose took the diary, her hands trembling. It was a treasure, a window into his soul, a record of his thoughts and feelings during their time together. He said if anyone came looking for him, I should give them this, the woman said, her voice soft. He said it contained clues. Clues. Rose's heart leaped with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The diary was another piece of the puzzle, another step on the path to finding him. She thanked the woman, paid for the music box, and left the shop, clutching the diary tightly in her hand. As she walked out into the bustling street, the sounds of London faded into the background. She was lost in her own world, a world of memories and secrets, a world where a forbidden waltz echoed through the years, a testament to a love that refused to die. Back in her small flat, bathed in the dim light of a single lamp, Rose opened the diary. The first page contained a single sentence, written in Thomas's familiar script: "The truth lies hidden where the music sleeps." The music, the waltz, the music box, the clues were starting to connect, forming a fragile thread that led her closer to Thomas, closer to the truth about his disappearance, and closer to the dangerous secrets he had been guarding. The echoes of the forbidden waltz were guiding her now, a melody of hope and danger playing out in the shadows of wartime London. Chapter 5. The Lavender and Bloodstained Scarf. The diary was a labyrinth of cryptic entries, veiled references, and half-finished thoughts. Thomas had been careful, knowing that his words could fall into the wrong hands. But Rose, intimately familiar with his mind, his way of thinking, began to decipher the hidden meanings, the subtle clues woven into the fabric of his writing. One entry, dated just a week before his supposed death, caught her attention. Lavender fields forever stained. The Scarlet Pimpernel bleeds again. Meeting at the crossroads, midnight hour. Beware the falcon. Lavender fields. Rose knew immediately what he meant. During their courtship, they had often taken walks in the countryside, escaping the suffocating atmosphere of London. There was a particular field, near Thomas's family estate, where lavender grew wild, its fragrant purple blooms stretching as far as the eye could see. They had spent many happy hours there, lost in their own world, oblivious to the war raging across the channel. But forever stained, what did that mean? And the Scarlet Pimpernel bleeds again, that was a reference to the famous novel, a story of daring rescues and secret identities during the French Revolution. Was Thomas comparing himself to the Pimpernel? Was he involved in some kind of clandestine operation, rescuing people from behind enemy lines? Meeting at the crossroads, midnight hour. Beware the falcon. This was clearly a rendezvous, a coded message about a secret meeting. But where was the crossroads? And who was the falcon? Rose pondered the entry for hours, turning it over and over in her mind. She felt like she was on the verge of a breakthrough, but the final pieces of the puzzle remained elusive. Then, she remembered the music box. The one Thomas had admired but refused to buy. The truth lies hidden where the music sleeps. She opened the box, letting the haunting melody of the waltz fill the room. She examined the box carefully, her fingers probing every nook and cranny. Inside the lid, beneath the velvet lining, she found a small, hidden compartment. And inside the compartment, nestled among a few dried lavender sprigs, was a silk scarf. It was stained with blood. Rose gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. The scarf was a familiar one. Thomas had worn it often, a splash of color against his somber uniform. The blood, it was a chilling reminder of the dangers he faced, the risks he took. But the lavender, it was a deliberate connection to the diary entry. The lavender fields forever stained. The blood on the scarf was the stain. The Scarlet Pimpernel bleeds again. Rose carefully unfolded the scarf, her fingers trembling. Embroidered in one corner, in tiny, almost invisible stitches, was a symbol, a crossroads. And above the crossroads, a single, stylized feather. A falcon's feather. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The crossroads, the falcon, the scarf was a map, a guide to the secret rendezvous. She examined the embroidery more closely. The crossroads were formed by two intersecting lines, each representing a road. One line was thicker than the other, suggesting a main road. The other was thinner, a smaller, less traveled lane. And at the point where they intersected, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible. Rose grabbed a map of the area surrounding Thomas's family estate, the area where the lavender fields grew. She scanned the map, her eyes searching for a crossroads that matched the one on the scarf. And then she found it, a small, unnamed crossroads, where a main road intersected with a narrow country lane, just a few miles from the lavender fields. The dot on the scarf corresponded to a small copse of trees marked on the map. The meeting place. A wave of fear washed over Rose. She was stepping into a dangerous world, a world of spies and secret agents, a world where one wrong move could cost her life. But she had come too far to turn back. She had to find Thomas, to uncover the truth, no matter the risk. She knew the midnight hour referred to in the diary entry was fast approaching. She had to go. She had to be at the crossroads. She had to face the Falcon. The lavender and blood-stained scarf had revealed the location. The diary had set the time, and her own unwavering love for Thomas was the driving force that propelled her towards a dangerous rendezvous with an unknown enemy. Chapter 6. The Spy Among the Suffragettes. The crossroads was shrouded in darkness, the only illumination coming from a sliver of moon hanging low in the sky. The air was cold and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and the distant rumble of artillery fire from across the channel, a constant, grim reminder of the war that raged on. Rose huddled in the copse of trees, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had arrived early, wanting to scout the area, to prepare herself for whatever lay ahead. She was dressed in practical, dark clothing, her hair tucked under a plain cap. She had brought a small, loaded pistol, a gift from her father, a veteran of the Boer War. She had never fired it before, but the weight of it in her pocket gave her a small measure of comfort. The diary entry had warned her, "Beware the Falcon." She didn't know who or what the Falcon was, but she knew it represented danger, a threat to Thomas, a threat to her. She scanned the surrounding area, her eyes straining to penetrate the darkness. Nothing. Just the rustle of leaves in the wind, the occasional hoot of an owl. The midnight hour approached. Rose felt a knot of tension tightening in her stomach. She was stepping into the unknown, into a world of espionage and betrayal, where trust was a luxury she could not afford. Suddenly, she heard a sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the direction of the main road. It sounded like Morse code. Rose held her breath, listening intently. The tapping continued, spelling out a message. T.S. alive.
Danger.
Trust no one. It was Thomas. He was alive. And he was warning her. But who was sending the message? Was it Thomas himself? Or was it a trap? Trust no one. The words echoed in her mind. Then, she saw a figure emerge from the darkness, walking towards the crossroads. It was a woman, dressed in the distinctive uniform of a suffragette, carrying a banner that read "Votes for Women." Rose frowned. A suffragette? At this hour? In this remote location? It seemed unlikely. The woman stopped at the crossroads, looking around, her face obscured by the shadows. Then, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, silver whistle. She blew a sharp, piercing note. The signal. Rose hesitated. Should she approach? Should she reveal herself? She didn't know who this woman was, whether she was friend or foe. But the Morse code message T.S. alive. She had to take a chance. She stepped out of the copse of trees, her hand on the pistol in her pocket. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The woman turned, her eyes widening in surprise. I'm waiting for someone," she stammered. A contact." "Who?" Rose pressed, her gaze unwavering. The woman hesitated. I can't say." "Are you the Falcon?" Rose asked, her voice sharp. The woman's eyes widened in fear. How do you know that name?" Rose took a step closer. "Thomas Sinclair sent me." "He's alive, isn't he?" The woman's face paled. She took a step back. I don't know what you're talking about." She was lying. Rose could see it in her eyes, in the way she fidgeted with her bag. This woman was the Falcon. She was the spy. She was the one Thomas had warned her about. Suddenly, a car emerged from the darkness, its headlights illuminating the scene. It screeched to a halt at the crossroads. Several men jumped out, their faces grim, their hands holding guns. "Get her!" one of the men shouted, pointing at the suffragette. The woman screamed and tried to run, but the men were too fast. They grabbed her, wrestling her to the ground. Rose stood frozen, watching the scene unfold before her. She didn't know what to do. Should she intervene? Should she run? Then, one of the men turned towards her, his eyes narrowing.
"Who are you?"
he demanded. Rose knew she had to make a decision. Her life, and perhaps Thomas's, depended on it. The spy among the suffragettes had been revealed, but the danger was far from over. The arrival of the men, the violence of the scene, confirmed her worst fears. Thomas was caught in a web of intrigue far more complex and dangerous than she had ever imagined. Chapter 7. The Midnight Rendezvous at Regent's Park. "I'm a friend of Captain Sinclair," Rose said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. She kept her hand on the pistol in her pocket, ready to draw it, if necessary. The man, tall and imposing with a scar across his left cheek, studied her with suspicion. "Captain Sinclair is dead," he stated flatly. "No, he's not," Rose countered, her gaze unwavering. "I have proof. He sent me a message." The man's eyes narrowed. "What message?" Rose hesitated. She didn't want to reveal too much, not yet. "He told me to meet him. Here. At the crossroads." The man exchanged a glance with one of his companions, a shorter, stockier man with cold, calculating eyes. "She's lying," the stocky man said. "She's with the Falcon." "I'm not with anyone," Rose protested. "I came here alone. To find Thomas." The scarred man seemed to consider her words. He gestured towards the captured suffragette, who was now bound and gagged, struggling against her restraints. "She claims to be working for Sinclair, too," he said. "But she's a known German agent. We've been tracking her for weeks." A German agent. Rose's mind reeled. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Thomas was caught in a deadly game of espionage, a world of double agents and shifting alliances. "I don't know anything about that," Rose said. "I only know that Thomas is alive. And I need to find him." The scarred man seemed to soften slightly. "If Sinclair is alive," he said, "he's in grave danger. The Falcon was supposed to deliver him to us. But she betrayed him. She was going to hand him over to the Germans." Rose felt a surge of relief. These men were on Thomas's side. They were trying to protect him. But if the Falcon had betrayed him, where was he? "Where is he?" Rose asked, her voice urgent. "Do you know?" The scarred man shook his head. "We were hoping she would lead us to him," he said, gesturing towards the captured suffragette. "But she's not talking." Suddenly, the suffragette, despite being gagged, managed to make a muffled sound. She was looking towards Rose, her eyes wide with fear? Or was it a warning? Rose followed her gaze. She saw something glinting in the moonlight, lying on the ground near the edge of the road. It was a small, silver object. A whistle. The Falcon's whistle. Rose remembered the Morse code message. "T.S. alive.
Danger.
Trust no one." And then, another memory surfaced. A detail from one of Thomas's letters, a seemingly insignificant anecdote about a walk they had taken in Regent's Park. He had mentioned a particular bench, near the boating lake, where they had sat and watched the swans. He had carved their initials into the wood.
T.S. Erka.
A sudden realization struck Rose. The whistle, the Morse code Regent's Park, it was another message. A hidden rendezvous. "Regent's Park," Rose said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's at Regent's Park." The scarred man looked at her, his expression skeptical. "What makes you say that?" Rose pointed to the whistle. She signaled me. In Morse code.
"Before you arrived."
"She told me Regent's Park." It was a lie, a desperate gamble. But she had to trust her intuition. She had to believe that Thomas was still alive, still sending her clues, still fighting to survive. The scarred man hesitated. He looked at his companions, then back at Rose. All right, he said. We'll check it out. But if you're lying, he didn't finish the sentence, but the threat was clear. They piled into the car, Rose sitting in the back, squeezed between the stocky man and the captured suffragette. The drive to Regent's Park was tense and silent, the only sound the rumble of the engine and the distant wail of air raid sirens. As they approached the park, Rose felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. She was close, she could feel it. But she also knew that she was walking into a trap, a dangerous game with unknown players and uncertain outcomes. The midnight rendezvous at Regent's Park was a gamble, a desperate attempt to find Thomas before it was too late, a leap of faith guided by a whistle, a memory, and the unwavering power of love. Chapter 8. The Interrogation and the Broken Vow. The air in the safe house was thick with tension, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Regent's Park had been a dead end. No Thomas. Just a deserted bench with their initials carved into the wood, a poignant reminder of a past that seemed increasingly distant. The scarred man, whose name Rose had learned was Major Davies, paced restlessly, his face etched with frustration. The stocky man, Sergeant Miller, stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the dark street outside. The captured suffragette, now identified as Helga Schmidt, sat slumped in a chair, her eyes downcast, her hands still bound. Rose sat opposite Helga, her own anxieties battling with a growing sense of despair. She had been so sure about Regent's Park, so convinced that Thomas would be there. Had she been wrong? Had she misread the clues? She's not talking, Major Davies said, his voice harsh. We've tried everything. Threats, promises, nothing. Sergeant Miller turned from the window. Perhaps we should try more persuasive methods, he suggested, his voice cold. Rose flinched. She knew what he meant.
Torture.
She couldn't condone it, but she also understood the desperation of the situation. Thomas's life was on the line. Wait, Rose said, her voice surprisingly strong. Let me talk to her. Alone. Major Davies raised an eyebrow. You? What makes you think you can succeed where we've failed? I understand her, Rose said. I know what it's like to be caught between loyalties, to be forced to make impossible choices. She was thinking of her own conflicting emotions, her love for Thomas versus her duty to her country, her growing suspicion that the official story of his death was a lie. Major Davies hesitated. He looked at Sergeant Miller, who shrugged. What have we got to lose?
He said.
All right, Major Davies agreed. But be careful. She's dangerous. He and Sergeant Miller left the room, leaving Rose alone with Helga. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Rose looked at Helga, studying her face. She saw fear, yes, but also something else, resignation?
Despair?
Helga, Rose began, her voice soft. I know you're scared, but I also know you're not a bad person. You're just caught in a terrible situation. Helga looked up, her eyes meeting Rose's. There was a flicker of surprise in her gaze. Why are you being kind to me? Helga asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her accent was thick, betraying her German origins. Because I believe you, Rose said. I believe you were working for Thomas. I believe you were trying to help him. Helga's eyes welled up with tears.
He was a good man, she said.
He saved my life. I owed him everything. Rose leaned closer. Then help me save him, she pleaded. Tell me where he is. Helga hesitated. She looked towards the door, as if expecting Major Davies to burst in at any moment. I can't, she whispered. They'll kill me. They'll kill him. Who? Rose asked, her voice urgent. Who will kill him? Helga took a deep breath. The Falcon, it's not me, she said. It's someone else. Someone close to him. Someone he trusts. Rose's heart sank. A betrayal. From within. That's what Thomas had been trying to warn her about. Trust no one. Who? Rose pressed. Tell me who it is. Helga shook her head. I made a vow. I promised him I wouldn't reveal his secrets. A vow Rose understood. She had made her own vows to Thomas, promises of love and loyalty. But this was different. This was a matter of life and death. Helga, Rose said, her voice firm. Thomas is in danger. His life is on the line. Your vow, it doesn't matter anymore. You have to break it. You have to tell me where he is. Helga looked at Rose, her eyes torn between fear and loyalty. Then, slowly, she nodded. He's at the hospital, she whispered.
St. Bart's.
But not as a patient. He's hiding. In the old wing. The one that was bombed. St. Bart's, the hospital. It made sense. A place of healing. A place of anonymity. A place where a wounded soldier could disappear. But the old wing, the bombed-out section, it was a dangerous place. A place of rubble and decay. A place where secrets could be buried forever. The broken vow had yielded a location, a dangerous and crumbling sanctuary, but the identity of the true Falcon remained a mystery, a shadow lurking in the background, a threat that still loomed large. Chapter 9. Escape across the rooftops. The old wing of St. Bartholomew's Hospital was a skeletal silhouette against the night sky, a testament to the brutal reality of war. Bomb-damaged and derelict, it stood in stark contrast to the bustling activity of the main hospital, a forgotten corner of a city struggling to heal. Rose, guided by Helga's whispered directions, navigated the treacherous rubble and debris, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had left Major Davies and Sergeant Miller behind, convincing them that she needed to go alone, that Thomas would only trust her. It was a risky gamble, but she knew that she couldn't risk exposing him to further danger, not until she knew who the true Falcon was. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, the silence broken only by the scuttling of rats and the distant sirens. Rose moved cautiously, her hand on the pistol in her pocket, her senses on high alert. She found the entrance to the old wing, a gaping hole in the wall where a door had once stood. She slipped inside, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. The interior was a maze of crumbling corridors, collapsed ceilings, and piles of rubble. Moonlight filtered through shattered windows, casting eerie shadows that danced and shifted with every gust of wind. She followed Helga's instructions, counting the corridors, turning left, then right, navigating the labyrinthine ruins. She felt like she was walking through a graveyard, a place of lost souls and forgotten memories. Then, she heard a sound. A soft moan coming from a room ahead. She approached cautiously, her pistol drawn, her heart pounding in her chest. She peered into the room. It was a small, former ward, now filled with debris. And in the corner, huddled amongst the rubble, she saw him. Thomas. He was alive, but barely. He was pale and gaunt, his uniform torn and blood-stained, his left arm in a makeshift sling. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. Rose rushed to his side, kneeling beside him, her hands trembling.
Thomas,
she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Thomas, it's me. It's Rose. He stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering. He opened his eyes, his gaze unfocused. Rose? He murmured, his voice weak. Is it really you? Yes, it's me, Rose said, tears streaming down her face. I'm here. I've found you. He tried to sit up, but winced in pain. Careful, Rose said, gently pushing him back down. You're hurt. I knew you'd come, he whispered. I knew you wouldn't give up. Rose smiled, her heart overflowing with love and relief. I never gave up, she said. But we have to get you out of here. It's not safe. The Falcon, he said, his voice urgent. He's still out there. I know, Rose said. Helga told me. But she didn't tell me who it is. Thomas shook his head. I can't say, he whispered. Too dangerous. He has connections. Everywhere. Suddenly, they heard a noise.
Footsteps, approaching fast.
Someone was coming. We have to go, Rose said, her voice panicked.
Now.
She helped Thomas to his feet, supporting his weight. He was weak and unsteady, but he managed to stand. They stumbled out of the room, back into the maze of corridors. The footsteps were getting closer. This way, Rose said, pulling him towards a shattered window at the end of the corridor. We can climb onto the roof. It was a risky move, but they had no choice. They were trapped. They climbed through the window, onto the crumbling remains of the roof. The wind whipped around them, the city lights stretching out below like a vast, glittering ocean. They moved carefully, picking their way across the uneven surface, the loose tiles and debris threatening to send them plummeting to the ground. Then they saw him, a figure silhouetted against the night sky, standing on a nearby rooftop. He was holding a gun. The Falcon. The escape across the rooftops was a desperate flight, a race against time, and a deadly pursuer, a testament to Rose's courage and Thomas's will to survive, a harrowing journey above a city scarred by war, with the identity of the Falcon still a terrifying unknown. Chapter 10. The Hidden Hospital of St. Bart's. The figure on the rooftop was too far away to identify, the darkness and distance obscuring his features. But Rose knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was the Falcon, the person who had betrayed Thomas, the person who wanted him dead. "He's seen us," Thomas whispered, his voice strained. "We have to keep moving." They continued their precarious journey across the rooftops, the wind howling around them, the drop to the street below a constant, terrifying threat. Rose kept a firm grip on Thomas's good arm, supporting his weight, guiding him through the treacherous terrain. They reached a gap between two buildings, a narrow chasm that seemed impossible to cross. Below, the streetlights flickered, illuminating the unforgiving concrete. "We can't jump it," Thomas said, his voice weak. I can't make it." Rose looked around desperately. There had to be another way. Then she saw it. A narrow drain pipe, running down the side of the building, leading to a lower roof. "We can climb down," she said, pointing to the drain pipe. "It's our only chance." It was a risky maneuver, especially for Thomas with his injured arm. But they had no choice. They were trapped. Rose went first, carefully lowering herself onto the drain pipe, her hands gripping the cold metal. It was old and rusty, groaning under her weight. She prayed it would hold. She reached the lower roof, her feet landing on solid ground. "Your turn," she called up to Thomas. Thomas hesitated. He looked at the drain pipe, then at Rose. He knew he had to trust her. He slowly lowered himself onto the drain pipe, his good arm wrapped tightly around it, his injured arm dangling uselessly at his side. He winced in pain with every movement, his face pale and drawn. Rose watched him, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath held captive in her lungs. She couldn't help him, she could only watch and pray. Suddenly, the drain pipe gave a sickening groan. A section of it, weakened by rust and age, ripped away from the wall. Thomas cried out, his grip loosening.
He was falling.
Rose screamed. She lunged forward, reaching out to him, her fingers grasping at his uniform. She caught him. Just barely. She held on tight, her muscles straining, her arms burning. She pulled with all her strength, slowly, painfully, hauling him back onto the roof. They collapsed together, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. They had made it. They were safe for now. But the Falcon was still out there. They had to keep moving. They had to find a safe place to hide. Rose remembered something Helga had said. "He's hiding in the old wing, the one that was bombed." But there was more to her words than just that location. There was a tone, an inflection, an underlying knowledge. "The hospital," Rose said, her voice breathless. "There must more than just the old wing. There is a hidden part, another section, somewhere safe. Within St. Bart's." Thomas looked at her, his eyes questioning. "Helga," Rose explained. The way she said it, it was not just the old wing. That it was also a clue. Another place inside, hidden. Thomas, remembering the cryptic clues and messages, the way Helga phrased it, understood at once. They got to their feet, their bodies aching, their spirits bruised but not broken. They made their way back into the bombed-out wing of the hospital, this time not searching through rooms, but through the walls. After searching and reaching a dead-end hallway, Thomas, running his hands against the cold stone, found it. A section of the wall that sounded hollow. He pushed, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden passage. They stepped inside, into a dimly lit corridor, the air surprisingly clean and warm. They had found it. The hidden hospital of St. Bart's. A secret sanctuary, a place of refuge, a place where Thomas could finally be safe. But the escape had taken its toll, and the question remained, who was the Falcon, and how far would they go to silence Thomas forever? Chapter 11. Scars that never fade. The hidden hospital was a revelation. It was a fully functioning, albeit small, medical facility, tucked away beneath the ruins of the old wing. It was staffed by a handful of doctors and nurses, all discreet, all fiercely loyal to their patients, a mix of wounded soldiers, resistance fighters, and others who needed to disappear from the prying eyes of the authorities. Dr. Amelia Sharma, a petite woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, reassuring demeanor, examined Thomas's injuries. She cleaned and bandaged his wounds, her touch gentle but firm. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, her voice soft. "The bullet wound in your arm is serious, but it could have been much worse. You've lost a lot of blood, and you're suffering from exhaustion and shock.
You need rest."
Rose sat beside Thomas's bed, holding his hand, her heart overflowing with relief. He was safe, he was being cared for, but the ordeal had taken its toll. He was pale and weak, his eyes clouded with pain and exhaustion. "How did you find this place?" Rose asked, her voice curious. Thomas managed a weak smile.
"It's a long story," he said.
"It's a network. People helping people.
"Keeping secrets." "Helga told me about it," Rose said.
"She said you saved her life." Thomas nodded. "She was working for me," he said, "gathering intelligence. She was a valuable asset." "She also told me about the Falcon," Rose said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She said it's someone close to you. Someone you trust." Thomas's eyes darkened.
"I know," he said.
I can't believe it. I don't know who it is." "We'll figure it out," Rose said, her voice firm. Together. Dr. Sharma returned, carrying a tray with a bowl of soup and a cup of tea.
"You need to eat," she said to Thomas.
"You need to regain your strength." Thomas ate slowly, his appetite small. Rose watched him, her heart aching for him. She saw the pain in his eyes, the weariness in his body, the scars that went deeper than the physical wounds. "The war, it changes you," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It leaves its mark. Scars that never fade." Rose knew exactly what he meant. She had seen the changes in him, in his letters, in his eyes. The war had taken a part of him, a part he might never get back. But she also saw his strength, his resilience, his unwavering spirit. She leaned closer, her hand gently touching his cheek. "You're still you, Thomas," she said. "The man I fell in love with. The war hasn't changed that." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and gratitude. "You're my anchor, Rose," he said. "You keep me grounded. You remind me of who I am, of what I'm fighting for." They stayed in the hidden hospital for several days, Thomas slowly regaining his strength, Rose constantly by his side. They talked, they shared memories, they made plans for the future, a future that seemed both uncertain and hopeful. But the shadow of the Falcon still hung over them. They knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. They had to uncover the truth, to expose the traitor, to clear Thomas's name. The scars of war, both physical and emotional, were a constant reminder of the battles they had fought, the battles they still faced. But their love, their bond, was stronger than ever, a beacon of hope in a world of darkness, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. They had found a temporary sanctuary, a place to heal, but the hunt for the Falcon, the quest for justice, was far from over. Chapter 12. The Confession in the Confessional. The hidden hospital, while a sanctuary, felt increasingly like a gilded cage. Thomas was recovering, but the knowledge of the Falcon's continued threat, the betrayal by someone he trusted, weighed heavily on him. Rose, too, felt the pressure, the constant fear that they were living on borrowed time. One evening, while exploring the labyrinthine passages of the hidden hospital, Rose stumbled upon a small, makeshift chapel. It was a simple room, with a few wooden benches, a crude altar, and a single stained glass window depicting St. Bartholomew, the hospital's patron saint. In a corner, Tucked away behind a curtain was a confessional. Rose felt a sudden urge to enter. She wasn't Catholic, but the confessional represented a place of truth, a place of unburdening, a place where secrets could be revealed without fear of judgment. She slipped inside, the small, enclosed space feeling both claustrophobic and strangely comforting. She knelt on the worn kneeler, her hands clasped together, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what she was going to say, what she was going to confess. But she felt a need to speak, to release the burden of fear and uncertainty that she had been carrying. "Forgive me," she began, her voice trembling, "for I have kept secrets. I have lied. I have doubted." She paused, taking a deep breath. She told the unseen presence behind the screen everything. About the telegram, the ashes, the cryptic clues, the journey she had undertaken, the dangers she had faced. She spoke of her love for Thomas, her fear for his safety, her growing suspicion that the truth about his death was far more complex and sinister than she had ever imagined. She spoke of her doubts, her fears, her moments of weakness. She confessed her anger at the war, at the men who had sent Thomas into harm's way, at the system that had declared him dead. As she spoke, she felt a sense of release, a weight lifting from her shoulders. The confessional, a symbol of faith and forgiveness, was providing her with a space to confront her own demons, to acknowledge her own vulnerabilities. When she had finished, she waited, her breath held captive in her lungs. Silence. Then a voice, soft and low, came from the other side of the screen. "The falcon you seek, the falcon?" Rose's heart leaped. It wasn't the voice of a priest. It was familiar. "Yes," she whispered. Do you know who it is?" The voice hesitated. "I do," it said. "But it is a dangerous truth. A truth that could cost you your life." "I don't care," Rose said, her voice firm. "I need to know. I need to protect Thomas." The voice sighed. "Very well," it said. "The falcon is someone you know. Someone you trust. Someone closer than you think." Rose's mind raced. Someone she knew? Someone she trusted? Who? "Tell me," she pleaded. "Tell me who it is." The voice paused again, then spoke, the words dropping like stones into the silence. "It's Alistair Finch. Alistair Finch, the man from the War Office. The man who had dismissed her concerns, the man who had told her to drop the matter, the man who had warned her that some secrets were best left buried." Rose felt a wave of nausea wash over her. It made sense. Too much sense. His access, his knowledge, his deliberate attempts to mislead her. He was the falcon. He was the traitor.
"Why?"
Rose asked, her voice trembling. "Why would he betray Thomas?" He's being blackmailed," the voice said. "The Germans, they have something on him. Something from his past. Something he's desperate to keep hidden." Blackmail, Rose understood. It was a powerful weapon, a way to control people, to force them to betray their country, their friends, their own principles. "Thank you," Rose said, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for telling me the truth." She stood up, her legs shaky. She left the confessional, stepping back into the dimly lit chapel. She felt a mixture of relief and dread. She had the answer. She knew who the falcon was. But now, she had to confront him. She had to stop him. As she walked away, she realized something. She hadn't recognized the voice. She couldn't place it. It was familiar, yes, but who was it? Who had confessed to her in the confessional? The confession in the confessional had revealed the falcon's identity, but it had also created a new mystery, a new layer of intrigue, a new voice in the shadows. Chapter 13. Betrayal at the Docks. The revelation of Alistair Finch as the falcon sent a shockwave through Rose and Thomas. They knew they had to act quickly, to expose him before he could do any more damage. But they also knew that they were dealing with a dangerous and powerful adversary, a man with connections in high places. They decided to use Major Davies, the scarred officer from the Special Intelligence Unit. He had seemed genuinely concerned about Thomas's safety, and they hoped they could trust him. They contacted Davies, arranging a secret meeting at a deserted warehouse near the London docks. The docks, a hub of wartime activity, were also a place of shadows and secrets, a fitting location for a confrontation with a traitor. The night was cold and foggy, the air thick with the smell of salt water and coal smoke. The warehouse was a vast, cavernous space, filled with crates and barrels, the silence broken only by the creaking of the timbers and the distant cries of seagulls. Rose and Thomas arrived first, their hearts pounding with anticipation and dread. Thomas, still weak but determined, leaned heavily on Rose's arm. Major Davies arrived shortly after, accompanied by Sergeant Miller. He looked surprised to see Thomas alive, but his expression quickly hardened. "You found him," Davies said, his voice clipped. "Good work, Mrs. Kensington." "We also found out who the Falcon is," Rose said, her voice steady. "It's Alistair Finch." Davies's eyes narrowed. "Finch? Are you sure?" "Yes," Rose said. "We have proof." She explained about the confession in the confessional, about Finch's blackmail, about his betrayal. Davies listened intently, his face grim.
"This is serious," he said.
"Finch is a high-ranking official. We can't just arrest him without concrete evidence." "We have the evidence," Thomas said, his voice weak but firm. He pulled out the diary, the scarf, the telegram, all the clues that Rose had gathered, all the pieces of the puzzle that pointed to Finch's treachery. Davies examined the evidence, his brow furrowed. He looked at Sergeant Miller, who nodded slowly. "All right," Davies said. "We'll bring him in for questioning." Just then, they heard a noise, a scraping sound, coming from the back of the warehouse. "Someone's here," Sergeant Miller said, drawing his pistol. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging the warehouse into darkness. Gunshots rang out, shattering the silence. Rose screamed, pulling Thomas down behind a stack of crates. They huddled together, their bodies trembling, the sounds of gunfire and shouting echoing around them. "It's Finch," Thomas said, his voice urgent. "He must have known we were coming. He set a trap." Rose peered through the gaps in the crates. She saw figures moving in the darkness, flashes of gunfire illuminating their faces. It was a chaotic scene, a deadly game of cat and mouse. Then she saw him, Alistair Finch, standing near the entrance to the warehouse, a pistol in his hand, a smug smile on his face. "You shouldn't have interfered, Mrs. Kensington," Finch called out, his voice echoing through the darkness. "You should have let sleeping dogs lie." Rose felt a surge of anger. This man, this traitor, had almost killed Thomas. He had betrayed his country, his friends, his own principles. She stood up, her hand reaching for the pistol in her pocket. "Rose, no," Thomas cried out, trying to stop her. But it was too late. Rose had stepped out from behind the crates, her pistol aimed at Finch. "It's over, Finch," Rose said, her voice shaking but determined. "You're finished."
Finch laughed.
"You think so?"
he said.
"You're just a foolish woman, playing a game you don't understand." Suddenly, another gunshot rang out. But it didn't come from Finch. It came from behind Rose. Rose felt a sharp pain in her back. She gasped, her knees buckling. She fell to the ground, her pistol slipping from her grasp. Thomas screamed. He crawled towards her, his face contorted with horror. Standing over Rose, his pistol still smoking, was Sergeant Miller. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Kensington," Miller said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "But you knew too much." Sergeant Miller was the Falcon, not Finch. Finch was just a pawn, a scapegoat. The betrayal at the docks was a devastating twist, a revelation that shattered their trust and left Rose fighting for her life, with Thomas watching helplessly, his world collapsing around him once again. Chapter 14. The Prisoner of the Tower. The world was a blur of pain and confusion. Rose felt herself being lifted, carried, her body jolting with every movement. She heard voices, shouts, but they seemed distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind struggling to make sense of what had happened. Sergeant Miller, he was the Falcon. He had shot her. He had betrayed them all. She remembered Thomas's anguished cry, his face contorted with horror. She remembered the cold, hard floor of the warehouse, the smell of gunpowder and blood. She awoke to find herself in a dark, damp cell. The air was cold and heavy, the silence broken only by the dripping of water and the distant clang of metal. She was alone. She tried to sit up, but a searing pain shot through her back. She gasped, her hand reaching to touch the wound. It was bandaged, but the bandage was soaked with blood. She was a prisoner.
But where? And why?
She examined her surroundings. The cell was small and bare, with a single, narrow window high up on the wall, barred with thick iron. The walls were made of cold, gray stone, damp and slimy to the touch. There was a straw pallet on the floor, a bucket in the corner. This wasn't a hospital. This wasn't a prison. This was something else. Then she heard it. A distant, rhythmic sound, like the tolling of a bell. A deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of her cell. The tower. She was in the Tower of London. The realization struck her like a physical blow. The Tower, a place of imprisonment, of torture, of execution. A place where secrets were kept, where enemies of the state disappeared. Miller had brought her here.
But why?
What was his plan? She thought of Thomas. Was he alive? Was he searching for her? Or had Miller killed him, too? The thought sent a wave of despair wash over her. She had to stay strong. She had to survive. She had to find a way to escape, to expose Miller, to save Thomas. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the darkness of her cell. She was given food and water, but she had no contact with anyone. She was completely isolated, cut off from the outside world. She tried to keep her mind active, to remember every detail of her journey, every clue, every conversation. She replayed the events at the warehouse, over and over again, trying to understand Miller's motives, his plan. She thought of Thomas, of his love, his strength, his unwavering belief in her. She drew strength from his memory, from the hope that they would be reunited. One day, or perhaps it was night, she heard footsteps approaching her cell. The heavy door creaked open, and a figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor. It was Miller. He stepped inside, his face expressionless, his eyes cold. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Kensington?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "Where's Thomas?" Rose demanded, her voice weak but defiant. Miller smiled, a cruel, chilling smile. "Captain Sinclair is unavailable," he said. "He won't be bothering you again." Rose felt a surge of fear, but she refused to show it. "You're lying," she said. "You didn't kill him." Miller shrugged.
Believe what you want, he said.
"It doesn't matter anymore. You're here, and you're not going anywhere."
Why?
Rose asked. "Why are you doing this?" Miller leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because I have to," he said. "Because I have no choice. They control me. They control everything." "Who?" Rose pressed. "Who controls you?" Miller hesitated. He looked around the cell, as if afraid of being overheard. It's a network," he said. "A secret society. They've been operating for centuries. They pull the strings, they manipulate events, they control the world." Rose stared at him, her mind reeling. A secret society, it sounded like something out of a novel, a fantastical conspiracy. But she knew, deep down, that it was true. It explained everything. Miller's betrayal, Finch's blackmail, the hidden hospital, the coded messages, and Thomas, he stumbled upon them? Rose asked. Miller nodded. He knew too much, he said. He was getting too close. He had to be silenced. "And you were ordered to kill him?" Rose said. Miller nodded again. "But I couldn't do it," he said. "I couldn't kill him in cold blood. So I faked his death. I hid him. I hoped he could escape. But they found out. They knew I had betrayed them. So they ordered you to kill me?" Rose said. Miller looked at her, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of regret and resignation. "Yes," he said. "But I can't do that either." The prisoner of the tower was not just Rose. She realized Miller, the supposed captor, was a prisoner of his own circumstances, trapped in a web of deceit and obligation far older and more powerful than he was. Chapter 15. Letters from a Lost Front. Miller's confession, though shocking, brought a flicker of hope. He wasn't a monster, but a man trapped by circumstances, forced to make impossible choices. He had betrayed Thomas, yes, but he had also tried to save him. And now he was refusing to kill Rose. "What are you going to do?" Rose asked, her voice barely a whisper. Miller looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea.
"Help me," he said. "Help me expose them. Help me stop them."
Rose hesitated. Could she trust him? Could she trust the man who had shot her? The man who had betrayed Thomas? But she saw the sincerity in his eyes, the desperation in his voice. She knew, deep down, that he was telling the truth. He was a prisoner, just like her, a pawn in a deadly game.
"How?"
Rose asked. "How can we expose them?" Miller reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was a diary, similar to the one Thomas had left with the antique shop owner.
"This is my diary," Miller said.
"It contains everything. The names, the dates, the operations, the evidence we need to bring them down." Rose took the diary, her hands trembling. It was a treasure, a weapon, a key to unlocking the secrets of the organization that had controlled Miller, that had threatened Thomas, that had cast a shadow over their lives. "But how do we get it out of here?" Rose asked. "They'll never let us leave." Miller smiled, a grim, determined smile. "I have a plan," he said. "But it's risky. It will require trust." He explained his plan, a daring and dangerous scheme that involved smuggling the diary out of the tower, contacting Major Davies, and exposing the organization to the world. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was their only chance. Over the next few days, or perhaps it was weeks, Rose and Miller worked together, refining the plan, preparing for their escape. They communicated in whispers in secret code, using the diary as their guide. Rose, despite her injury, found a new strength, a new determination. She was no longer just a grieving widow, a helpless victim. She was a fighter, a survivor, a woman determined to avenge Thomas, to expose the truth, to bring down the organization that had destroyed their lives. Miller, too, seemed to find a new purpose, a new resolve. He was no longer just a traitor, a pawn. He was a rebel, a defector, a man determined to redeem himself, to atone for his sins. One night, under the cover of darkness, they put their plan into action. Miller, using his knowledge of the tower's security, disabled the alarms, opened the gates, and led Rose through the maze of corridors and courtyards. They moved silently, swiftly, their hearts pounding in their chests, the fear of discovery a constant, chilling presence. They reached the outer wall, the final barrier between them and freedom. Miller boosted Rose up, helping her climb over the wall, onto the narrow ledge that ran along the outside. "Go," Miller whispered.
"Get to Davies.
"Tell him everything. Show him the diary." Rose looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something more. She saw the pain in his eyes, the sacrifice he was making. "What about you?"
she asked. "What will happen to you?"
Miller smiled, a sad, bittersweet smile.
"Don't worry about me," he said.
"I'll be fine. Just go. Save yourself. Save Thomas." Rose hesitated. She wanted to stay, to help him, but she knew she couldn't. She had to get the diary to Davies. She had to expose the organization. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." She turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Miller behind, a solitary figure silhouetted against the ancient walls of the tower. She ran through the streets of London, her lungs burning, her legs aching, the diary clutched tightly in her hand. She reached Major Davies's office, pounding on the door, her heart racing with fear and hope. She handed him the diary, the letters from a lost front, a testament to betrayal and sacrifice, a key to unlocking a conspiracy that reached the highest echelons of power. The evidence was in Davies's hands now, but Miller's fate and the future of their fight remained uncertain. Chapter 16. The Shell-Shocked Soldier's Plea. Major Davies listened intently as Rose recounted her escape from the tower, Miller's confession, and the contents of the diary. He examined the diary carefully, his face growing grimmer with each page he turned. "This is explosive," he said, his voice low. "This could bring down the entire government." "The war effort, I know," Rose said. "But it's the truth. We have to expose them." Davies hesitated. He was a loyal soldier, a patriot, but he also knew that corruption existed, even at the highest levels of power. He had seen it before in the trenches, in the back rooms of Whitehall. "This is bigger than us, Mrs. Kensington," he said. "We need help. We need someone we can trust. Someone outside the system." Rose thought for a moment. She remembered the voice in the confessional, the unknown person who had revealed Finch's identity. The person who had seemed to know so much about the organization. "There is someone," she said. "But I don't know who he is. I only heard his voice." In the confessional. At St. Bart's. Davies raised an eyebrow. "A priest?" "I don't think so," Rose said. The voice, it was familiar. But I couldn't place it. It was disguised. Somehow. Davies pondered this for a moment. "St. Bart's," he said. "The hidden hospital. There must be a connection." He decided to investigate. He and Rose returned to St. Bart's, to the hidden hospital beneath the ruins. They found Dr. Sharma, the calm and capable doctor who had treated Thomas. She listened to their story, her eyes widening in disbelief. "A secret society?" she said. "Controlling the government? It sounds impossible." "But it's true," Rose said. "We have the proof. We just need to find the person who confessed to me. The person who knows the truth." Dr. Sharma thought for a moment. "There was a soldier," she said. "He was brought in a few weeks ago. Severely shell-shocked. He talked a lot. Rambled. About conspiracies. About secrets, about a powerful organization. Where is he?" Davies asked, his voice urgent. Dr. Sharma led them to a small, isolated room at the far end of the hidden hospital. Inside, lying on a narrow bed, was a young man, his eyes vacant, his body trembling. He's not always coherent," Dr. Sharma said. "He has moments of lucidity, but they're rare." Rose approached the bed, her heart aching for the young soldier. He was just a boy, really, his mind shattered by the horrors of war. She knelt beside him, her hand gently touching his arm. "Hello," she said softly. "My name is Rose." The soldier stared at her, his eyes unfocused. He didn't seem to recognize her. "We need your help," Rose continued. "We know you know something. About a secret organization. About the Falcon." The soldier's eyes flickered. He seemed to react to the word Falcon. "Falcon," he murmured, his voice weak. He's everywhere. He sees everything. He controls." He trailed off, his body shaking violently. He was having a seizure. Dr. Sharma rushed to his side, administering a sedative. The soldier's body gradually relaxed, his breathing becoming more regular. "I'm sorry," Dr. Sharma said. He's not well. I don't think he can help you." Rose was about to give up, to despair, when the soldier, his eyes still closed, began to speak again, his voice barely a whisper. "The clock," he murmured. "The clock, it knows the time, the truth, the clock." What did he mean? Rose looked around the room. There was no clock. Then she remembered. The grandfather clock. In the safe house. Where they had interrogated Helga. "The safe house," Rose said, turning to Davies. "There's a grandfather clock. He must be talking about that." Davies nodded. "It's worth a shot," he said. They left the hidden hospital, returning to the safe house where Helga had revealed the location of the hidden hospital, where Rose and Thomas had waited for Major Davies and the now revealed traitor, Miller. The shell-shocked soldier's plea, his fragmented words, had given them a new direction, a new clue, a new hope in their quest to expose the truth. Chapter 17. The Dance of Deception at the Embassy. The grandfather clock stood silent and imposing in the corner of the safe house, its pendulum frozen, its hands stuck at midnight. It was an antique, a relic of a bygone era, its presence seemingly innocuous. But Rose knew, thanks to the shell-shocked soldier's cryptic words, that it held a secret, a key to unlocking the truth about the organization. "The clock, it knows the time, the truth," the soldier's words echoed in her mind. Rose examined the clock carefully, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings, the delicate details. She pressed on the panels, ran her hands along the edges, searching for a hidden mechanism, a secret compartment. Davies watched her, his expression skeptical. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Kensington?" he asked. "It seems unlikely." "We have to try," Rose said. "It's the only lead we have." She continued her search, her determination fueled by a mixture of hope and desperation. She had come so far, faced so many dangers, lost so much. She couldn't give up now. Then she felt it. A slight give, a subtle shift in the wood. She pressed harder, and a small panel on the side of the clock popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled among a collection of gears and springs, was a small, rolled-up piece of paper. Rose carefully removed the paper, her hands trembling. She unrolled it, revealing a list of names.
It was a membership list.
The names of the members of the secret organization. Rose scanned the list, her eyes widening in disbelief. The names were familiar, prominent figures in British society, politicians, military leaders, industrialists, even members of the royal family. At the top of the list, underlined in red ink, was a single name, Lord Harrington. Lord Harrington. Rose knew the name. He was a powerful and influential figure, a close advisor to the king, a man who had been instrumental in shaping British policy during the war. He was also Thomas's uncle. Rose felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Thomas's uncle, he was the leader of the organization. He was the one who had ordered Thomas's death. He was the one who had orchestrated the entire conspiracy. Davies took the list, his face pale. "This is incredible," he said. "This changes everything." "We have to expose him," Rose said, her voice firm. "We have to bring him to justice."
But how?
Lord Harrington was a powerful and untouchable figure. They couldn't just arrest him. They needed concrete proof, evidence that would stand up in court, evidence that would convince the world of his treachery. Then Rose remembered something. A detail from one of Thomas's letters, a seemingly insignificant anecdote about a diplomatic reception at the Russian embassy. Thomas had mentioned that Harrington had been behaving strangely, that he had been seen meeting with a known German agent. "The Russian embassy," Rose said. "There's a reception tonight. Harrington will be there. We can gather evidence. We can expose him." It was a risky plan, a dangerous gamble. The embassy was a neutral territory, a place of diplomacy and intrigue, a place where spies and secrets mingled freely. But it was their only chance. They had to take it. They prepared for the reception, Rose disguising herself as a journalist, Davies posing as a military attaché. They entered the embassy, a world of glittering chandeliers, elegant gowns, and hushed conversations, a dance of deception where every smile hid a secret, every word a potential lie. Their target, Lord Harrington, the man at the center of the web, the uncle who had betrayed his own nephew, the leader of a conspiracy that threatened to undermine the very foundations of their world. Chapter 18. A promise forged in the flames. The Russian embassy was a swirling vortex of opulence and intrigue. The air hummed with the murmur of conversations in multiple languages, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the strains of a string quartet. Rose, disguised in a borrowed dress and a carefully applied wig, felt a knot of tension tighten in her stomach. She scanned the crowd, searching for Lord Harrington, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Davies, looking surprisingly at ease in his borrowed uniform, stood beside her, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced vigilance. "He's here," he murmured, near the fireplace, talking to the ambassador. Rose followed his gaze. There he was, Lord Harrington. Tall, imposing, with a distinguished air and a silver mustache, he looked every bit the respected statesman, the trusted advisor to the king. It was hard to believe that this man, this pillar of British society, was the leader of a treacherous secret organization. "We need to get close," Rose said. "We need to hear what he's saying." They moved through the crowd, slowly, carefully, making their way towards Harrington. They pretended to be engaged in conversation, laughing at each other's jokes, their eyes constantly fixed on their target. They reached a position just behind Harrington, close enough to overhear his conversation with the ambassador. They were discussing the war, the latest developments on the front, the need for a negotiated peace. Harrington's words were carefully chosen, diplomatic, but Rose detected a subtle undertone, a hidden agenda. He was advocating for a peace that would benefit Germany, that would undermine the Allied war effort. Then Rose saw it. A small, almost imperceptible gesture. Harrington slipped a piece of paper to the ambassador, a folded note. The exchange was so quick, so subtle, that most people would have missed it. But Rose saw it. She knew, instinctively, that the note contained something important, something incriminating. "We need to get that note," Rose whispered to Davies. Davies nodded. "I'll create a diversion," he said. "You grab it." He moved away from Rose, towards a group of military officers. He accidentally bumped into one of them, spilling his drink on the officer's uniform. A commotion ensued, apologies, exclamations, a flurry of activity that drew the attention of everyone nearby, including the ambassador. Rose seized her opportunity. She slipped behind the ambassador, her hand reaching for the pocket where he had placed the note. Her fingers brushed against the paper. She grabbed it, pulling it out of his pocket. She quickly concealed the note in her own handbag, her heart pounding in her chest. She had it. The evidence. She turned to leave, but she bumped into someone. It was Lord Harrington. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. He recognized her. Despite the disguise, he knew who she was. "Mrs. Kensington," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What are you doing here?" Rose felt a surge of fear, but she stood her ground. I'm a journalist," she stammered. "I'm covering the reception." Harrington smiled, a cold, chilling smile. "I don't think so," he said. "I know who you are. And I know what you're up to." He grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, Mrs. Kensington," he said. "It's time to end this." Suddenly, a figure emerged from the crowd. It was Thomas. He was dressed in his uniform, his left arm still in a sling, but his eyes were blazing with anger. "Let her go, Uncle," Thomas said, his voice firm. Harrington's eyes widened in surprise. "Thomas? You're alive?" "Yes," Thomas said. "And I'm here to stop you." He lunged at Harrington, tackling him to the ground. They struggled, a tangle of limbs and angry shouts. Davies, having dealt with the distraction he created, rushed to Thomas's aid. Together, they overpowered Harrington, subduing him. The reception had erupted into chaos, guests screaming, security guards rushing towards the scene. Rose stood there, watching the struggle, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and fear. Thomas was alive. He had come for her. He had saved her. As the guards led Harrington away, his face contorted with rage and defeat, Thomas turned to Rose. He took her in his arms, holding her close, his body trembling. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm here," Rose said, her own tears streaming down her face. "I'm here." They had done it. They had exposed Harrington. They had stopped the organization. They had won. But the victory was bittersweet. The flames of the war, the fires of betrayal, had left scars that would never fully heal. But in the ashes of their struggle, a promise had been forged, a bond of love and loyalty that would endure, a testament to their courage, their resilience, their unwavering belief in each other. Chapter 19. The Price of Freedom, the Cost of Love. The aftermath of the embassy confrontation was a whirlwind of activity. Lord Harrington's arrest sent shockwaves through the government and the military. The evidence Rose had obtained, combined with Miller's diary and Thomas's testimony, was irrefutable. The secret organization was exposed, its members rounded up, its operations dismantled. The scandal rocked the nation, but it also brought a sense of cleansing, a purging of the corruption that had festered beneath the surface of wartime society. Major Davies, vindicated and promoted, oversaw the investigation, ensuring that justice was served. Sergeant Miller, still imprisoned in the tower, was granted a degree of leniency in exchange for his cooperation. He would serve time for his crimes, but his willingness to betray the organization, to help Rose, had saved him from the hangman's noose. Rose and Thomas, hailed as heroes, were thrust into the public eye. They were interviewed by newspapers, celebrated by the public, honored by the government. But they shunned the limelight, preferring the quiet solitude of their own company. They retreated to Thomas's family estate, to the lavender fields where they had spent so many happy hours before the war. The fields were no longer stained with blood, but with the memory of their struggle, their sacrifice, their love. Thomas's physical wounds were healing, but the emotional scars ran deeper. He was haunted by the betrayal of his uncle, by the horrors he had witnessed, by the knowledge that he had been a pawn in a deadly game. Rose, too, bore the scars of their ordeal. The gunshot wound in her back had left a permanent mark, a reminder of the violence she had endured. But she also carried the emotional weight of her journey, the fear, the doubt, the constant threat of death. They found solace in each other's arms, in the shared understanding of their experiences, in the unwavering bond that had been forged in the flames of adversity. They spent their days walking in the fields, talking, remembering, healing. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the lavender fields, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the landscape, Thomas took Rose's hand. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I'm sorry for everything you've been through. I'm sorry for putting you in danger." Rose shook her head. "Don't," she said. "You have nothing to apologize for. You saved my life. You saved us." "But I almost lost you," he said. "So many times." "But you didn't," Rose said, her voice firm. "We're here. We're together. That's all that matters." Thomas looked at her, his eyes filled with love and gratitude. "I don't deserve you, Rose," he said. You're extraordinary. You're the bravest, most courageous woman I know." Rose smiled. "And you're the kindest, most honorable man I know," she said. "Even after everything you were willing to see the good. And you were right." They sat in silence for a moment, their hands clasped together, their hearts beating in unison. The price of freedom, they knew, had been high. The cost of love, even higher. But they had paid the price, they had borne the cost, and they had emerged stronger, more resilient, more deeply in love than ever before. The future remained uncertain, the war still raged on, but they had each other, and they had hope. And in a world torn apart by conflict and betrayal, that was all that mattered. As they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they knew their time would be spent rebuilding. Chapter 20. Reunited beneath the armistice bells. November 11th, 1918. The news spread like wildfire through the streets of London, a joyous, unbelievable wave of relief. The war was over. The armistice had been signed. The guns had fallen silent. Rose and Thomas stood in Trafalgar Square, surrounded by a sea of cheering, weeping, celebrating people. The air was filled with the sound of church bells, car horns, and the roar of the crowd, a cacophony of joy that drowned out the memories of gunfire and sirens. They held each other close, their bodies trembling with emotion, their tears mingling with the rain that had begun to fall. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. They had survived. They had fought, they had suffered, they had almost lost each other, but they had made it. They were alive. They were together, and the world was finally at peace. The crowd surged around them, a mass of humanity united in a moment of collective euphoria. People were dancing, singing, embracing strangers, their faces radiant with joy and relief. Rose looked at Thomas, her eyes shining with tears. "We did it," she whispered. "We survived." Thomas smiled, his own eyes brimming with emotion. "We did," he said. "Together." He leaned down and kissed her a long, tender kiss that sealed their love, their commitment, their future. It was a kiss that spoke of shared pain, shared triumph, shared hope. It was a kiss that transcended the horrors of war, the betrayals, the losses. It was a kiss of life, of love, of peace. As the bells of London pealed out across the city, announcing the end of the war, Rose and Thomas stood hand in hand, their hearts overflowing with gratitude and love. They had found each other amidst the ashes of a broken world. their love a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. They had faced death, betrayal, and unimaginable hardship, but they had emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable. They had exposed a conspiracy that threatened to undermine their nation. They had brought down a powerful and corrupt organization. They had fought for justice and freedom. But their greatest victory was their love. A love that had blossomed in the shadow of war. A love that had been tested by fire. A love that had endured. As the celebrations continued around them, Rose and Thomas turned away from the crowd, walking towards a quieter corner of the square. They stood beneath the statue of Nelson, a symbol of British resilience and victory, their gaze fixed on the future. The war had changed them, it had scarred them, but it had also made them stronger, more compassionate, more determined to live their lives to the fullest. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, setbacks. But they also knew that they could face anything as long as they had each other. The armistice bells continued to ring, their joyous sound echoing through the streets of London, a symphony of peace, a celebration of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. And beneath those bells, reunited and resolute, Rose and Thomas began their new life, a life forged in the crucible of war, a life dedicated to love, to peace, to a future free from the shadows of the past. They would build again together. Epilogue. Years passed. The scars of war, both physical and emotional, gradually faded, but they never completely disappeared. Rose and Thomas rebuilt their lives, brick by brick, memory by memory, their love a constant source of strength and comfort. They returned to the lavender fields, to the place where their love had first blossomed, to the place where they had faced their greatest challenges. They built a home there, a sanctuary, a place of peace and tranquility. Thomas, though he never fully recovered from his injuries, found a new purpose in life. He became a writer, chronicling his experiences during the war, exposing the corruption and the betrayals that had almost cost him his life. His books became bestsellers, shining a light on the dark corners of the conflict, advocating for peace and justice. Rose, too, found her own calling. She became a nurse, dedicating her life to helping others, to healing the wounds of war, both physical and emotional. She worked at St. Bart's, in the very hospital where she had found Thomas, where she had uncovered the secrets of the hidden hospital, where she had faced her greatest fears. They had children, a son and a daughter, who grew up in the peace and tranquility of the lavender fields, surrounded by love and laughter. They told their children stories of the war, of the sacrifices that had been made, of the importance of courage, of loyalty, of love. They never forgot Sergeant Miller. Though he remained in prison for many years, Rose and Thomas visited him regularly, offering him friendship and support. They recognized his flawed heroism, his ultimate decision to choose the right path, even at great personal cost. Alistair Finch, exposed and disgraced, died in prison, a broken and forgotten man. Lord Harrington, stripped of his titles and his power, lived out his days in exile, haunted by the consequences of his actions. As the years turned into decades, Rose and Thomas grew old together, their love enduring, their bond unbreakable. They had witnessed the horrors of war, the depths of human depravity, but they had also experienced the power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, the possibility of redemption. One evening, as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the lavender fields, their hands clasped together, their hearts filled with gratitude, Rose turned to Thomas. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, her voice soft. "All the pain, all the suffering, was it worth it?" Thomas smiled, his eyes twinkling with love and wisdom. "It was worth it," he said, "because it brought me to you. Because it taught us the true meaning of love, of loyalty, of sacrifice. Because it showed us that even in the darkest of times, hope can survive. And love can conquer all." He leaned over and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of a lifetime of shared experiences, of a love that had endured the test of time, of a promise kept, of a future embraced. The lavender fields, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, stood as a silent witness to their enduring love, a testament to their courage, a symbol of hope and healing in a world forever changed by war.